please.
Thank you. And Mr. Secretary, I appreciate many of the sentiments that you've expressed today, but I want to go back to the memo. And I know that you and I have talked about it, and I heard your response to the chairman. But we debated these policies in this committee. We debated them with the House and the Senate as each chamber developed its respective proposals to reauthorize these federal surface transportation programs. These policies were ultimately rejected and not included in the final legislation sent to the president's desk. So let me give you a specific example, and I believe you have it there because there's no way you can read it from there.
Appreciate it.
House Chairman Peter DeFazio's Invest in America Act included language that restricted the ability of a state to carry out a project that added new capacity for single occupancy passenger vehicles. His language is shown on this one over here. You can see it's got some highlighted areas. The FHWA memo directs FHWA staff to encourage state departments of transportation and other entities to consider certain factors before advancing projects that result in new capacity for single occupancy vehicles. The language from this memo is shown in this other poster here. As you can see, this language from the memo is lifted from the bill that DeFazio had that was sent over here to the Senate as the Shell bill that we rejected here in the United States Senate. The Surface Transportation Reauthorization Act, which passed this committee, had no such language in there. I've said many times this is a bipartisan bill. It's a product of careful negotiations that reflected the will of the committee unanimously. You sent me a letter earlier that said, in response to what bringing this to your attention, and your memorandum said that it's consistent with the bipartisan infrastructure language. And I just don't think it's consistent, and I'm really troubled that a memo coming from your department has language in it that was rejected from the House bill, basically verbatim. So I guess, what's your reaction to that?
So I guess I would say my understanding is what was rejected was the mandate with regard to these goals, not the idea of these goals. So as I look down the text, for example, the first one I see is progress in achieving a state of good repair consistent with the state's asset management plan. Now, I cannot imagine that anyone here rejects the proposition that it's a good thing to have progress in achieving a state of good repair consistent with the state's asset management plan. What I do recognize is that there was a move in the House to say that unless you'd shown that progress, you couldn't even go forward on some of that new construction. And if that were to have prevailed, then of course my department would be responsible for implementing that law. But that's not what the law says that you passed, of course. The law does not say that you have to prove that you've made that progress on a state of good repair in order to do anything else. But I would be perplexed by any suggestion that we should no longer believe that a state of good repair is a good thing. If I were to go to the next bullet, and I think that I'm just seeing this here, but I think it's the same that's on the board, and I appreciate your providing it for me because it is a bit of an eye chart from where I sit. There's a reference to how the project will support the achievement of the state's performance targets. So again, as I understand the progress of the bill, the Senate did not go forward with a requirement saying the state has to meet its performance targets in order to be allowed to do new construction. And so as we go forward implementing the law, we would not impose any such mandate. But of course, we still believe it's a good thing for a state to achieve its performance targets. If I go to the third one, it says whether the project is more cost-effective than both operational improvements to the facility or corridor and transit projects eligible under Chapter 53, Title 49. So my understanding is, had the House bill passed, we would have been required under the law to certify that in some way in order to allow that funding to go forward. But of course, that's not what passed, as you point out. And so there is no such requirement. But of course, cost effectiveness continues to be something that we would consider to be important and would support states in achieving. So to me, the difference, of course, is that mandate. And my understanding is, and our understanding as we go forward, implementing the law as written is it has no such mandate, and that's why the memo says that there's no such requirement.
So from your explanation, would I assume that the fact that they're verbatim from the DeFazio bill into the memo that came from your department, word for word, is just because?
Well, it's because they're good ideas. It's just that the law doesn't mandate them, so neither will we.
So are you in the habit of lifting language from unpassed bills and putting it into regulations that you put forward that obviously had been negotiated out of bills?
Well, again, our understanding was that what was negotiated out was not the idea of cost effectiveness, but the mandate. So as we seek to implement the bill as written, you'll continue to see phrases like state of good repair that I trust have been on the lips of secretaries, Republican and Democrat alike, and members of both parties in both chambers. But the law as written does not provide for us to require it, and so we won't.
Okay, so I think and you referenced the letter from AASHTO, the state highway administrators, who also wrote you a letter expressing concerns, along with governors and many states. And in that, you pick out a sentence that says that they very much share the policy priorities outlined in the guidance. But the 4-page letter is basically saying, yes, these things are important. These things are things that we as states formulate. It's different for Maryland than it is for me or Delaware or North Dakota. So let us keep the flexibility of moving forward on safety and repair. This is what state DOTs do. They keep their roads as much as they can in good state repair. That's what they're doing now and have done. But now we have an opportunity with a bipartisan infrastructure package to really build more where areas that need that. And in your memo, you say more capacity, but there's a big but in there. You have to consider all these other things. You should consider all these other things. If you look further into the AASHTO letter, since you brought it up, some of the quotes are, while the legislative process that led to the IIJA was certainly unconventional, and the congressional intent regarding the federal highway program over the next 5 years provides state DOTs with flexibility in how investment decisions are made with formula to meet each state's unique mobility and accessibility needs, proposals to require fix-it-first solutions or prescribe the use of certain sources of funding for system preservation do not reflect the use of strategic planning, but rather a one-size-fits-all approach to asset management. So this is part of the letter that you're quoting from as well, as they deviate from what they see is a directive from the department to do it one way, this way, if you want to have favorable or at least move higher up into the priorities. So what kind of reaction would you have to that?
Well, I think that the states are rightly saying that they share these same goals that we're talking about, the kinds of goals reflected in these bullets, for example, but they want the flexibility to be able to do it based on their strategy, based on their approach, and based on their needs. And we support that flexibility. In implementing the law as written, we are to provide the flexibility that's written into the law, and of course the accountability that's written into the law for the standards that apply to the use of federal taxpayer dollars, and that's what we will seek to do.
Yeah, and I would say there's confusion here. There's confusion from the stakeholders. There's confusion from the state DOTs because they said they are expressing concern in the letter they said back to you. I'm going to move on to one more thing before I give up my questioning. I think I'm over my time. Maybe I should wait and let the others members question. I wanted to ask about the one federal decision.
Sure.
Quickly, I want to know how are you implementing this? What steps have been taken? What kind of conversations are you having between all the different agencies?
So I'll give you the most compact answer that I can, which is that we're working hard to implement that, in particular noting the expectation of steps consistent with the 2-year agency average in clearing those projects that are major, that have that environmental impact statement attached to them. We'd be happy to follow up about with more detail on the progress, but we take that.
Do you have a timeline for implementing this?
Well, it's already now, we work toward that goal right now. in terms of when we'll be able to have sort of the dashboard up and see how we're tracking toward that goal. I hope to be making progress right away.
Okay, thank you.
Before we turn to Senator Cardin for the next round of questioning,